Book 4, Falcon in the Barn, Chapter 7. Is that my daughter out there? Planting season came miraculously early in 336. Suddenly one day it was sunny, with the promise that the cold was gone for the season. Perhaps the Creator was making up for the late cold weather of last year, Mari considered, and the terrible darkness of the current raining season. Perrin started changing a few weeks ago, after shouting at the darkness. He slept solidly without any secret assistance, smiled frequently, and once laughed so long and loud that Mari excused herself to go to the washroom to weep for joy. When the sun burst out and the snows vanished almost overnight that week, Mari wondered if it wasn't the world responding to Perrin's reversal. But Mari still had one concern. As soon as the snow was gone, so was her only daughter. Jatesy claimed she was going to help Mrs. Brighter with her massive garden, but Mari feared she was still hiding from the family. For a moment, though, Jatesy was home. Mari looked out the window at her daughter sitting on the log bench in the yard, mindlessly kicking little stones into the spit area. Mari breathed the same prayer she had since last weeding season. Please help her to find what she's looking for. Please sustain her until then. It wasn't fair. When Mari was a girl, at least there were still ways to be entertained, girls to laugh with, or at, Mari thought guiltily. But Jatesy was so alone. Nearly all of the activities her friends engaged in, Mari and Perrin wouldn't allow. And now half of her classmates were hanging around the fort at the northeast entrance, wandering off with soldiers to secluded areas of the safer edges of the forest. That meant safe was a very subjective term. Jatesy had maturely distanced herself from her classmates, but also seemed to have distanced herself from everyone else as well. Mari suspected most of her daughter's retreating had to do with Perrin's erratic behavior, and Mari's neglect of her children while she tried to help him. But he hadn't interrogated any of them in weeks, and had normal conversations again. That is, when he could find Jatesy. Mari feared she'd missed some critical phase of her daughter's life in the past year, and could never hope to cover the ground lost between them. She tried hard to think of what they could do together, but her mind was blank as she finished packing the meal for Jatesy to bring to Perrin. Maybe this was how Hisamum had felt with Mari after her father passed away, fearing they had nothing in common, trying to find ways to make her happy. They had plenty in common now. But Mari couldn't imagine waiting years to be close to her daughter again. Mari had been happy as a teen despite being alone. She loved nothing so much as her books. They were like spending hours each day with her father. And that, Mari concluded, was what Jatesy needed, besides a real friend her age. Time with her father to see that the best parts of him were back. Perrin had changed his duty hours toward the end of raining season, on Young's recommendation. He now went to the fort at midday meal and stayed till nearly bedtime, sleeping later in the mornings, then spending an hour alone thinking, reading, and just breathing in the sunshine in the back garden brightened him. When he came in for a late breakfast and Mari kissed him on her way to school, his grin was as wide as ever. Jatesy needed to see him smiling like that. But she'd leave early for school each day, and for the planting season break she was gone before dawn. Mari couldn't think of anything more miserable than sitting in dirt alone. Mari took the pail with Perrin's dinner and walked it out to Jatesy. She looked up at her with a small smile. Father's dinner? Yes, enough for both of you. He really enjoys seeing you every day, you know. This has been a good system. Yes, I know. She took the pail without fully seeing it. He's doing quite well today. Again, Jake's quite nearly his old self. Mari simply couldn't think of anything else to say. Yes, I know, Jatesy repeated. I best be going. He'll be hungry. I'll be home in an hour. And she left through the back gate to the alley. Mari watched Jatesy walk down the alley, then turn onto the main road for the fort. She had been getting her husband back, but somewhere along the way, she'd lost her daughter. Jatesy strolled along the main road that led to the fort, glancing around to make sure Thorne was nowhere in sight. She was sure he was still in the compound somewhere, but she always checked. Too many times she'd run into him at the market or outside of her school. By the look on his face, she knew their brief and uncomfortable encounters were planned. But tonight there was no mountain lion in sight waiting to pounce on her. She sighed, breathed in the cooling air, and grinned. She didn't mind bringing Father his dinner. It was one of the few times she felt free. Free from her mother brooding, free from Lemuel Thorne staring, and free from the girls at school talking about people and activities she'd never know about. Along the way to the road, she could smile at soldiers, and they dared to smile back. She memorized some of their names, too. It was much easier now that Grandmother Pato had stitched labels that decorated each of their jackets. Mother gave Father the idea, after worrying about how anyone could identify him if he were found lying on the side of the road, and Father sent the idea to Ida Mia. Now every soldier in the world had his name stitched in yellow thread on a patch worn just above his heart. By the time Jatesy reached the fort's compound late that afternoon, she smiled easily and received easy smiles back. She decided her mood had something to do with being outside. The sun had done her father good, so maybe she was like him in that way. Somehow she'd have to confess it all to her mother. She seemed so worried lately, and it was time to explain that she wanted to be a farmer. Jatesy giggled as she made her way to the command tower. The smell of dirt on her hands was soothing. Planting rows of peas with the hope of what might come made her feel connected to the world, the real world. Not the world of fancy dresses and strange music, but the real world that bubbled and quaked and grew. And if she listened hard enough, she was sure someday she would hear it exhaling. She loved leaving the house early every morning to see what else she could put into the dirt to watch grow. Why her mother wanted to hide inside poring over books when she could be outside submerging her hands into the dark soil, Jatesy couldn't imagine. Mrs. Brighter had taught her so much about soil, insects, seeds, sun, water. Jatesy had no idea the ground was so alive. And this afternoon, as she'd stared at the back garden, it wasn't because she was intentionally avoiding her mother. It was because she was planning what to do to that pathetic garden, but didn't have the foggiest idea of where to start. She was so caught up in trying to decide if all the weeds should go first, or the rocks, that she didn't even realize her mother had come out of the house. Those green weeds poking up out of the ground were pleading to be pulled. But Jatesy didn't want Mari to know just yet how desperately she wanted to fix up their yard. In a way, Mari still seemed to Jatesy a bit fragile, needing of careful handling. It was the same emotion she experienced whenever Grandmother Pato handed her one of her porcelain cups. She loved it, she admired it, but she worried about breaking it. Not that Jatesy thought she'd actually break her mother, she considered, as she walked through the reception area, but she didn't know what to do with her. But she did know it was time to confess a few things, such as her love of farming. That thought put a smile on her face as she climbed the stairs to the tower. Mari's shocked expression would be worth capturing in a portrait. Jatesy decided with a quiet giggle. She would have to make her announcement in front of Father, Pato, and Uncle Shem, so they could all enjoy her reaction. Too wrapped up in her thoughts, Jatesy hardly noticed that she reached the top of the stairs until she bumped into a soldier hurrying on his way down. "Oh," she laughed as she collided into a jacket that stopped her on the steps. "I'm sorry, Corporal Wen?" She read his chest, looked up into his face, and smiled. "I've been daydreaming again." Corporal Wen grinned back as he made his way slowly past her on the top stair. "Dream all you like, miss. And to think I was dreading coming up here. I wish I'd known my trip down would be so pleasant." He tipped his cap, and Jatesy giggled, turning to go to her father's office. But blocking her path was Thorn, hands behind his back, feet apart, chest heaving angrily, and his cold blue eyes stern. "Thorn," Colonel Shin called from his office, "is that my daughter out there? I thought I heard a giggle." "Yes, sir," the captain said. His voice was calm, but his face was furious. Jatesy didn't understand why. "Well, then let her in. I'm starving." Thorn stepped slowly away, never taking his eyes off of her. Jatesy pushed past him and into her father's office, slamming the door behind her. Half an hour later, after they'd finished eating, and Jatesy had told him of her plan to shock her mother, it was wonderful to hear him laughing again. Jatesy peeked out his door to the outer office. It was empty except for a private in the corner, whose handwriting looked very similar to the colonel's, painstakingly copying reports to be sent to Ida Mia. "What are you looking for, Jates?" her father asked. "He's gone, if that's what you're wondering." She turned back to him. "Actually, yes, Thorn." Perrin left his desk, took a peek out the door himself, then shut it quietly. "I know I've said a few strange things this last year, but trust me on this one. Stay away from Thorn. At least until you're older, much older. You'll be 16 in a couple of weeks and considered an adult according to some laws, but that's still too young." "Don't worry, Father." She tiptoed to kiss him on the cheek. "No man could tear me away from you, especially Thorn. He's so—" Not able to think of the right description, she shuddered instead. Perrin grinned. "Just the reaction I was hoping to see. I don't want to visit my grandchildren in Ida Mia." "Ew, neither do I." He kissed her on the head and spanked her playfully. "I'll see you tonight before bed. I'll bring home the dinner bucket." Jatesy ran down the stairs, grinning. The sun had just set, but she could still make it home before it grew too dark and cold. As she left the building, she decided she had to tell her mother about gardening that night, after Father came home. That revelation would bring down a barrier Jatesy feared had grown between them, and would be the first thing she wanted to weed away. "Miss Jatesy, come with me," a hiss said in her ear, and a hand gripped her upper arm. Frightened, she glanced to see who had captured her, and was startled by the angry face of Lemuel Thorn. "Why? What do you want?" He didn't answer her, but marched her through the darkening compound and out the northeast gates. Jatesy tried to catch the eyes of any other soldiers, hoping they'd see that something wasn't right. But no one would look at Thorn, as if they were used to avoiding him. He steered her to the right, over to the feed barns on the side of the fort. Jatesy's inside squirmed in fear, and she tried to pull away, but Thorn twisted her arm into an awkward position. "Don't do that, and stop drawing attention to yourself," he insisted. "I will snap this bone in two. Don't think I won't." He kicked open the feed barn door and pushed her in. She fell on top of some of the large bales and spun to face him, trying to catch her breath. He slammed shut the doors and lit a lantern posted nearby. After placing it on the hook, he analyzed her severely. "I want an explanation from you, Jatesy," he said bitterly as he unbuttoned his jacket. "About what?" she demanded, trying not to sound as startled as she felt. He wrenched off his jacket and threw it on the ground. He stepped up to her just inches from her face, his blue eyes steely and his broad chest heaving again, covered only by the thin white undershirt. She couldn't back away from him without falling over the bales behind her. "About you and your lies. I've watched you. I know you've seen me," he snarled. "Not ready for walking and talking?" He paced like an impatient mountain lion. "Yet I've seen you making eyes at every soldier in this fort." "Making eyes?" Jatesy cried. "I've done nothing but smile. There's nothing wrong with that." He lunged at her, forcing her to sit on the bale behind her. "Nothing but smile? What was that on the stairs back there? With a corporal, he spat. How many other men have you flirted with? My future wife shouldn't be looking at anyone. As terrified as Jatesy was, she was suddenly more angry. She pulled her legs up onto the bale and stood up. I'm not your future wife. I don't want anything to do with you, Lemuel. Find some other animal to be the mother of the next general. She climbed to the next higher bale, looking for a way out. He jumped on top of the bales to face her, and she scrambled back down them again. She knew she was going further away from the door, but hoped there was a way out the back. She searched either side for an escape, but discovered only walls of hay. When she twisted back around, she saw Thorn smiling, and realized that smiles could be ugly. Oh, you'll be mine. There's no one else but you. He jumped to a lower bale. I've been patient. His voice was strangely calm and measured as he dropped to the dirt in front of her. But as my father has said, sometimes girls don't know they want something until they have it. Jatesy's mouth went dry, and her arms and legs felt floppy. She took a few steps back and found herself hitting another wall of hay behind her. She was trapped. Thorn took another step closer and undid the buckle of his sheathed sword. You are ready, and you are mine. Shem rode through the northeast gates and felt immediately that something was wrong. He looked up at the command tower where the light was still on in Colonel Shin's office, but that didn't seem to be the problem. He reined his horse to a stop and scanned the compound. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary as he slid off his horse. Feed barns now. The thought was undeniable. Leaving his mount, Shem jogged out of the gates and looked to the barns, but there was no smoke or flames. Confused, he turned to walk back through the gates. Feed barns now. Shem spun without further delay and sprinted. One of the barns had a light shining through the cracks, and from it he heard a female shriek, I said no! Shem kicked open the door and saw no one immediately, but heard a commotion behind a few fallen bales. He hurtled over them and scrambled to the top of the next pile. What he saw in the dim light wrenched his gut. Captain Thorn was on all fours, looking as if he was about to vomit. His hair and trousers were disheveled, and his undershirt was partially torn. The young woman crawling away from him frantically adjusted her tunic and skirt to cover her, and looked up at Shem. Shem groaned as he recognized her face in the weak light. Something clicked inside him as a dormant instinct sprang to life, filling him with rage and energy. No! Shem leaped onto Thorn, flattening him to the ground. In a flash, Shem flipped him onto his back, pressed his long knife against his throat, and crushed Thorn's chest with his full weight. Jatesy, out! Jatesy yelped and scrambled over the bales, still trying to fix her tunic as she ran out of the barn. Oh, what are you going to do, Zenas? Thorn, clearly nauseated, still did his best to sound patronizing. You certainly can't kill me or even cut me. You know that all I need to do is send one message to my father, and he'll have you transferred all the way back to Flax. Shem firmed his grip on the knife and pressed the flat edge of the blade hard against Thorn's throat. Oh, I'd be perfectly justified in killing you right now, you sniveling piece of... He couldn't say the word. Someone as debased as Thorn wouldn't make him say the word. Don't you ever touch that girl again, do you hear me? Despite Shem's knife pressing down on his throat, Thorn still managed a ragged chuckle. Let's get something straight here, Zenas. She's too young for you. And you, Shem bellowed, filled with a desire to turn that blade just a little. That's all it would take, just a fraction of an inch, and a tiny thrust would end the repulsive captain's life. He'd killed before, and each time it had left him sickened. But at that moment, the thought of stabbing Thorn's windpipe filled him with such a hunger it should have terrified him. But it didn't until much later that night. Instead, he shouted, "She's too young for you or any man." Clinging to his self-control with a shaky grip, he let the knife's angle shift slightly so that the tip repeatedly punctured Thorn's throat as Shem's arm shook. The captain winced each time it jabbed him. "She's like a daughter to me," Shem spat. "You should be thankful it was me who found you and not the colonel. You'd be dead right now. In fact, I have half a mind to drag you to him now." Remarkably, or maybe stupidly, Thorn attempted another gasping chuckle. "Shin won't care. He knows this is how it is." "Shin would care. He does care," Shem insisted. Thorn scoffed and his belly dry heaved, but still he muttered, "Shin can't get mad for something he used to do all the time. Ever heard the phrase, 'out to the barn for a roll in the hay'? Who do you think came up with that?" "Shut up!" Shem yelled. "He has a reputation, you know. All the command school men know it, but no one has been able to match it." "Shut up!" "Oh, yes, Shin took many young women to the barns when he was even younger than me. At least, I plan to marry the girl, so it doesn't matter when I take her." "Shut up! Shut up!" "You should hear the women in Idemia talk, Sergeant. When my mother got around her friends, who had also been officers' daughters, well, let's just say they weren't too discreet." It took Shem a moment to realize it really had been his fist that punched Thorn in the jaw, and that was why he stopped talking, and why his mouth was bleeding, and why Shem's hand was throbbing. Perhaps he wasn't allowed to kill Thorn, but the cosmos did approve of hitting him. Slowly Shem growled, "Thorn, leave Jatesy alone, and don't you ever speak that way about your commander again." Thorn spat out a mouthful of blood. "Zenas, you'll pay for that." He gagged on his own blood and nausea. "Oh, I will pay," Shem assured him as he repositioned the blade against his throat. "I will pay extra careful attention to make sure you stay far, far away from her. You'll learn just how annoying and persistent I can be. Every day and every night I'll be watching you." The desire to stab Thorn was so intense that Shem's hand nearly burned, but some influence from inside calmed the knife in his hands, and through a force not quite his own, pulled it gently back. And then he heard the words clearly in his mind, "Not now, not yet, another day." He had to let Thorn go. He knew that. But knowing it and doing it are two different things. Then again, he could just let Perrin handle things, and that would be a most terrifying and yet satisfying death to witness. Shem shifted uneasily, shocked at his own thoughts, and again he felt his right hand pull away from Thorn's throat. But it, too, desperately wanted to form a fist and punch that smarmy mouth. "You say a word of this to Shin," Thorn said, blood bubbling from his lips which he tried to spit away, "and I'll have my father transfer you far away." "I don't have to say a word. Jatesy will tell him, and then you'll be the one packing up." Thorn scoffed at that. He won't believe her. No officer believes his daughter. And if he did, he still can't touch me, or he'd be the biggest hypocrite alive. Besides, taking girls really doesn't matter. Zenas, that's what they're here for. Our use. The voice in Shem's mind reacted before he could thrust the long knife, ordering him to release him now. Shem knew from experience to listen to that voice, even if it went contrary to everything he wanted. Especially when it went contrary. Grudgingly, Shem slid off of Thorn's chest, and the captain rolled over, gasping and coughing and spitting out blood. He scrambled to his feet, a bit unsteadily, and gave Shem a nasty smile. "You want me to stay away from Jatesy? Well, maybe she doesn't want me to stay away, Zenas. What then?" Without waiting for a response, he snatched up his jacket and sword and stumbled into a run from the barn. "Why, you little—" Shem shoved the long knife into his boot, his right hand eagerly forming a fist, envious of the left hand's well-placed punch, and he ran to the front doors. But there he stopped, realizing that by the time he caught up to Thorne, there'd be dozens of soldiers around. So beating up the captain in front of them could generate a few questions. Lemuel would have enough explaining to do about his appearance, but he'd probably just claim he was thrown from his spooked horse. Shem realized he had other options. He could go tell Perrin, which would doubtlessly result in spectacular retribution. Jatesy. Her terrified face from a few moments ago filled his mind, and he realized he had plenty of time to tell her father. Right now, there was an almost 16-year-old girl in likely terrible condition. Shem closed his eyes and immediately pictured where she was. He sprinted around the side of the barn to a stand of trees where he could just make out a figure cowering on the ground in a tight ball. "Oh, Jatesy," he whispered, and gingerly tiptoed over to her. He hesitated to hug her, concerned that the presence of another man might be the last thing she wanted. Instead, he crouched and placed a gentle hand on her head, which she had buried in her arms. Cautiously, she lifted her head to see who was there. Then, recognizing Shem, she lunged and caught him in a hug. Shem sat down in front of her to hold her, trying to keep back his tears of rage. "Come here, Jates," he said softly, as she curled up into his arms the way she did when she was 6 years old. She was far too big now, but he found a way to embrace her anyway. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Jates. We need to get you to your mother." To his astonishment, she pulled away and exclaimed, "No, Uncle Shem, we can't do that to them. Mother's not ready, and did you see Father today? He looks so good. Next week is so important. He has to be ready for the ceremony. I can't do this to them." "Jates, they need to know. Your mother needs to... He gave up, trying to find the words. What her mother would do to even begin to try to fix any of this was, well, he didn't know, nor did he try to imagine. All he knew was that this was far, far beyond the role of an uncle. Jatesy slid off his legs and knelt next to him. "Shem, I'm all right," she said, sounding strangely mature and calm. "I'm fine." When he looked at her more closely in the growing dark, he realized she wasn't even crying, but grinning. Completely perplexed, all he could say was, But... He got the worst of it, Uncle Shem. You and Father would have been proud of me. I got him twice. I kick more accurately than Pato." But... He wasn't successful, Shem." And he noticed that she once again dropped the uncle. "He couldn't be. I remembered everything Father showed me and did most of it. I really am all right." She smiled and patted his shoulder comfortingly. Shem leaned back against a tree and covered his face with his hands. "Oh, thank the Creator," he whispered. "You're something else, Miss Jatesy Shin. Come to think of it, he did look pretty bad before I even got to him." He released a tense chuckle. "Oh, Jates, when I saw you in there..." He shook his head at the memory that was still so raw, so enraging. "I was ready to kill him. I really was." "You didn't, did you?" she said, panic rising in her voice. "You'd get into so much trouble. I mean, I heard you yelling at him, but you didn't..." "No," Shem sighed heavily. "I didn't kill him." Pricked his throat a few times. Punched him in the jaw pretty good. "Good," Jatesy said, something deep and bitter in her tone that made Shem's left fist feel proud of itself. "Jates, we need to keep him away from you." "I know," she agreed, "but I bring Father his dinner every evening, and I don't want to miss that. It's been good for both of us." A terrible thought occurred to Shem. Wait a minute. Just how long has this been going on with Thorne? Jatesy shrugged and examined the dark earth she sat on. "He was walking me home every day last year when he first arrived, but by weeding season I told him I wasn't ready for his attention. He did kiss me once, though, last year. She shivered at the memory. I've run into him a couple dozen times since then, but only for a few minutes here and there. Then tonight, she paused, her voice a little shaky. Tonight, he said I was ready. His right hand balled up into a fist, ready and willing, but Shem forced it to relax. Oh, Jates, I'm sorry. I had no idea. I don't think your parents knew either. I figured everyone had enough to worry about, so I just handled him myself. Hid in the fields, weeding, things like that. You shouldn't have to, though, he told her earnestly. I could have helped. It was a bad time, she said vaguely. Then Shem understood, and he closed his eyes. It was when Perrin was first struggling, wasn't it? And I bet I said something stupid like, we shouldn't bother him with anything. Didn't I? She nudged his boot with hers. It wasn't stupid, Shem, and I really didn't want to bother any of you. Well, you shouldn't have listened to me, and that's the only time I'll ever say that again. I could have helped. Promise me you won't keep something like this a secret again. The whole reason why I'm here is to help your family. I've already promised Lemuel I will be keeping a very close eye on him. But you know, Jates, it would be a lot easier if you told your parents. She got up on her knees. No, Uncle Shem, I'm begging you. Don't say a word to them. I held him off. You scared him nearly to death, I'm sure. Not a word to my parents. You got lucky, Jatesy, but you might not be next time. And next time, it might not be Thorn. It might be another... He recognized her clearly confused look. Grampy Neeks had been right. Soldiers were looking at little Jatesy Shin, and she definitely wasn't little anymore. She probably noticed their smiles, but innocently didn't recognize their leers. He groaned as she cocked her head at Tim in question. He really didn't want to have this discussion with her. All right, he sighed. I promise, not a word. Whenever you come to the fort, let me walk with you. But let me state right now, I don't like keeping this a secret from your parents. They can handle it now. Come on, Shem. She kicked his foot again, this time playfully. I'm sure you've kept a few secrets from them. Something flashed across Shem's face that Jatesy must have glimpsed in the dark. You have, haven't you, Uncle Shem? She giggled. So just one more secret then, please, for a little while. If there's any more trouble with Lemuel, then we will tell them. If not, they'll never have to fret about what they don't know. Shem groaned softly and rubbed his temples. All right. Your family's giving me a headache, Jatesy. All these secrets. Don't tell Perrin he's being sedated. Don't tell my parents Thorn tried to attack me. Don't tell Mari that Ursula Thorn kissed Perrin and Idamia. That last one wasn't an accidental revelation. He wanted Jatesy to know, on some level, exactly what kind of family the Thorns were. Shem wasn't disappointed by her reaction. Jatesy's eyes were bulging appropriately when she gasped, Whoa, Shem! She did what? When you were in Idamia? Tell me. Yep, she did. Right in front of me, too. But if I told you all that I know about everything, you'd be so shocked you'd sit there for 3 days straight. Jatesy giggled despite her surprise. So what happened? Shem smiled half-heartedly. Don't you worry, Jates. Perrin didn't return her affection and got rid of Ursula as fast as you got rid of her son. Without kicking her, though. Then, mumbling to himself, he added, Why anyone wants to be an officer is beyond me. You people are so messed up. Be a farmer, my father said. You want stress? Try growing crops. Jatesy giggled again and kissed Shem's cheek. Thank you for keeping us all straight. At least we keep you entertained, right? You don't regret being with us, really, do you? Entertained? Ha! Shem barked. I used to think people went to the amphitheater because they were so bored with their lives that any of that nonsense they show now would be a welcome diversion. But now I'm thinking if they have lives anything like ours, they go just for some kind of escape. Entertained. She looked slightly hurt. He gently squeezed her arm. But no, Jates, I never regret being with your family. Wait, let me think about it. All right, no. Poor Shem, Jatesy laughed softly. By the way, how did you know to come to the Barnes? Just a feeling I knew I had to act upon. Well, on behalf of the Shin family, I thank you for coming to the rescue. Again. Oh, I do it so often it's an old habit now. He waved it off, got to his feet, and held out his hands to help her up. Come on, I'll walk you home. We need to come up with an excuse as to why you're late getting home. Oh, listen to me. Now you have me making up lies. That's why you're an honorary Shin. And that's the end of the chapter. Thank you.